Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. It was 8 long years that Maggie was dead. 8 years of emptiness, loneliness, and scars that hadn't healed. The illness had been brutal. A rare, fulminating cancer. A complicated name, which Daniel had quickly stopped saying, as if erasing it from words could slow down the inevitable. Everything had changed in just a few months. First, Maggie's fatigue, which she hid behind weary smiles. Then the persistent cough, the aches and pains, the tests. The bad news had fallen one by one, relentless, like blows from a sledgehammer. And Daniel, himself, had watched helplessly as the woman he loved collapsed. Every day he saw her fade away a little more, eaten away inside, even though she tried to stay strong, especially in front of Liam, their 7-year-old little boy at the time. Until her last breath, she had tried to smile, for them, for the love she had for them. The night she passed away, Daniel collapsed in the hospital room, his hand clutching Maggie's now ice-cold hand. He screamed silently, his throat tight, unable to shed a single tear. Something inside him had broken forever that night. Since then, Daniel Harper has been a shadow of his former self. Once upon a time, he was this cheerful, lively man who laughed loudly, who told stories to his son in the evening, who danced awkwardly in the kitchen with his wife, just to hear her crystal-clear laugh. But all that was gone. After the funeral, he sold their house, unable to breathe without suffocating under the weight of memories. He mechanically emptied the closets, gave away Maggie's dresses, and stored the photo albums in a sealed box that he never dared open again. Yet he had stood. Because he had no choice. Because there was Liam. A 7-year-old boy who, overnight, had lost his mother and didn't understand why the world had suddenly gone dark. Daniel had clung to his role as father like a lifeline. He had hidden his distress behind a strict routine, set like clockwork: wake up, school, work, dinner, bedtime. Always moving forward, never looking back. But deep down, he was nothing more than an automaton. He had stopped believing in happiness, given up on hope. Today, Liam was 15 years old. A sensitive, discreet, somewhat reserved teenager, but with a deep gaze and a lively mind. He had become the living portrait of his mother. Same shy smile, same gentle gaze, same way of running his hand through his hair when he was thinking. Every day, Daniel's heart broke as he watched him grow. Sometimes he caught glimpses of Maggie in his son's gestures, facial expressions so familiar that it took his breath away. He wondered what she would have thought if she saw him like this. Would she have been able to reassure him when he doubted him? Would she have been able to speak to him with the words he sometimes struggled to find? There were so many nights when Daniel, alone in his room, had found himself crying silently, asking Maggie to send him a sign, some strength, something. But there was never an answer. Only this silence. This emptiness. And this son, who reminded him every day both of the beauty of what he had lost, and the pain of his absence. It was a winter Saturday, one of those days when the cold seeps into your bones, when the air seems heavy with melancholy. The sky was low, a uniform gray, and a light drizzle fell gently over the city, making the streets shiny, almost ghostly. Father and son had just left the cemetery, their hands numb from the cold, but above all from the weight of this annual visit to Maggie's grave. Like every year, Daniel had tried to appear solid, to hide the trembling in his voice by reading aloud a little note that he slipped into a flower pot. Liam, now a teenager, had grown up, but he kept that same silent gaze as he stared at the engraved stone: Margaret Harper, beloved wife and mother, 1983 to 2017. Daniel knew that this ritual had become both a habit and a trial for them. Each year, the pain returned, untouched, sharpened by the memory. To lighten the atmosphere, to break this cold which was not only that of winter, Daniel suggested, in a deliberately detached voice. "Come on, let's have lunch somewhere. Somewhere we don't know. It'll take our minds off things." Liam nodded without question. They walked in silence through the quiet streets of downtown Charleston, a city they had rarely visited as a family. Everything here seemed foreign to them, and it was probably for the best. Fewer memories to haunt them. They stumbled upon a small, discreet establishment with an old-fashioned frontage, where a hand-painted sign read, Daisy's Corner. Through the steamy windows, we could see red and white checkered tablecloths, bouquets of dried flowers on the tables, and an old jukebox playing a soft melody, a nostalgic jazz tune that seemed to come from another time. There was something warm and comforting about the place. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and warm bread mingled with the sweet aromas of pastries cooling on the counter. They pushed open the door. A bell jingled softly, welcoming. Daniel and Liam sat at a table near the large window, the one that overlooked the street. As they took off their coats, they savored this cocoon of warmth, far from the cold outside. A few minutes later, a waitress appeared, approaching them lightly, a notebook in her hand. She had a kind smile, full of natural sweetness. "Hello, my name is Grace. I am here to help you today. What can I do for you?" Her voice, soft and reassuring, echoed strangely in Daniel's mind, without him immediately paying attention. She took their order with ease, writing it down in neat handwriting, then calmly walked away to the counter. It was at that moment that Liam, who had been staring at the waitress, leaned towards his father, his eyes wide, and whispered in a low, almost trembling voice. "Dad, that waitress, she looks like Mom." Daniel, absorbed in his thoughts, first made a distracted movement. He turned his head mechanically, his gaze following his son's. And there, his heart stopped. His face froze, his features tense. He felt the blood drain from his face, a cold shiver running from the back of his neck to his fingers. His mouth fell open, unable to utter a single word. It was impossible. Absolutely impossible. But he wasn't dreaming. This woman, this waitress. She had Maggie's face. Not just a vague resemblance, no. Not one of those light coincidences that make you smile. It was his face. The same soft chin shape, the same high cheekbones, the same slightly almond-shaped hazel eyes, and that quiet, almost dreamy expression. Even the way she absent-mindedly pushed a brown lock behind her ear was the same. Throughout the meal, Daniel couldn't concentrate on what was on his plate. He played absently with his fork, moving the food around without actually eating. His throat was too tight, his stomach too tight. His gaze kept drifting towards the waitress. Every time she passed by their table, he froze. He watched her like a hunted man, trapped between doubt and fascination. She had the same wavy brown hair as Maggie, those long, thick curls that cascaded over her shoulders with that natural movement he knew by heart. But that was not all. There was the way she smiled. That small, discreet, almost shy smile, revealing a dimple in the corner of her left cheek, just like Maggie's. And his voice. My God, his voice. Soft. A little veiled. With that calm, slightly sing-song intonation that resonated like an echo in Daniel's memory. He closed his eyes for a moment, barely listening to the words of his son in front of him. It was unbearable. Even his gait, that way of walking, light, fluid, almost floating. A familiar sway of the hips, like an unconscious dance. Every detail, every gesture brought him brutally back to her. But no. This is not possible. Maggie was dead. He had witnessed everything. He watched over her night and day in the hospital, until the last moment. He had seen her emaciated face, her features exhausted by pain, her breath short and panting, until it stopped. He had felt the coldness invade his skin, seen his gaze fade before his eyes. He had held his icy hand, cried into his inert palm. And he had followed, like an automaton, everything that followed, the closing of the coffin, the ceremony, the burial, the engraved tombstone. No, there was no doubt. She was dead. Definitely. So who was this woman? When she returned to their table, notebook in hand, bringing the bill with a polite smile, Daniel felt his heart pound. He couldn't take it anymore. He had to talk to her. To know. He looked up at her, met her gaze, and felt dizzy. His eyes. The same hazel eyes. Deep. A mixture of tenderness and mystery. He forced himself to speak, his voice hoarse, nervous, almost trembling. "Excuse me," he stammered, unable to hide his confusion. "I know this is going to sound strange, but you look like someone I used to know." She stared at him, slightly surprised by the intensity of his voice, before smiling kindly, a simple and sincere smile. "Oh, you're not the first to tell me that," she replied, laughing softly, a light, crystalline laugh that made Daniel shiver. "Sometimes people tell me that I remind them of a sister, a friend. It's funny, isn't it?" But beneath this smile, beneath this apparent lightness, Daniel perceived something else. A glint in her eyes. A quiver in her voice. As if, for a moment, she herself had felt troubled. As if, behind this serene mask, there was a crack. A shiver ran down Daniel's spine. It wasn't just a physical resemblance. It was deeper. As if their souls had recognized each other before their minds could even admit it. He looked away, helpless, unable to catch his breath. He understood at that moment that this woman, whether she was Maggie or not, was going to turn his life upside down. And what he had just felt, this inner tear, was only the beginning. After paying the bill, Daniel and Liam went out into the cold. The icy air hit them full in the face, biting their cheeks, but Daniel paid no attention. He walked mechanically, hands shoved in his pockets, shoulders hunched, mind elsewhere. Liam, on the other hand, had a feeling something was wrong. His father hadn't said a word since their exchange inside. He hadn't even asked him if he'd liked his meal, which he always did. They walked home in silence. But in Daniel's head, everything was going round in circles. This face. This voice. This laugh. He had tried to find rational explanations during the journey, a genetic coincidence, a simple uncanny resemblance, perhaps a distant cousin, an illusion of his tired mind. But nothing held. Everything inside him screamed that this was no coincidence. He felt nauseous. His heart was beating fast, too fast. The night was torture. He tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep. Memories of Maggie intermingled with images of the waitress. Every detail came back, the dimple, the voice, the gait, and above all, that look. By dawn, he had made his decision. The next day, without warning Liam, Daniel returned to the restaurant alone. The atmosphere was still as warm as ever, as if nothing had changed. The same smell of coffee hung in the air, and the same old jukebox hummed a jazzy tune. But in Daniel's mind, everything was different. He felt as if he were entering a sacred, or cursed, place. He sat down at the same table as the day before, near the window. His gaze scanned the room relentlessly, and his heart raced when he saw the waitress. She was there. Always so calm, smiling, light. As if she carried no burden. But Daniel felt on the edge of the abyss. He watched her for a long time, without saying anything, his breath short, every muscle tense. She busied herself between the tables, chatting with customers, serving steaming plates. Every smile she gave others was like a stab in the back of Daniel's neck. Then, suddenly, as she was serving a dish to a neighboring table, her sleeve rode up slightly, revealing her left wrist. Daniel felt his heart skip a beat. There. Right there. A birthmark. Discreet, but perfectly visible. Small, half-moon shaped, just inside the wrist. Exactly the same as Maggie. He knew this mark by heart. He had kissed it 1,000 times. She called it this little hidden star. Never, in 8 years, had he been able to erase this memory. And there, before his eyes, this woman was carrying her. In the same place. Daniel jumped up, trembling, unable to control his movements. He walked towards her, his breathing ragged. "Excuse me. I know this is going to sound very strange, but..." His voice was trembling, almost hoarse with emotion. She looked at him, surprised, frowning, visibly unsettled. "Yes?" He took a deep breath, searching for words. Are you sure about your identity? About your past? Have you always lived here? She stepped back slightly, wary. Pardon? I mean, were you adopted? Have you ever had memory loss? Blurry periods in your life? Times when you didn't remember who you were? The woman froze, bewildered. Her features hardened, mixing fear and incomprehension. Sir, I think you've got the wrong person. I don't understand what you're getting at. But Daniel wasn't listening anymore. He felt the ground giving way beneath him. He searched feverishly in his wallet, his hands shaking. He took out an old, dog-eared photograph, which he had always kept in an inner pocket, like a talisman. In the image, Maggie beamed, several months pregnant, standing in front of their house, her arms around her rounded belly, her smile radiant. Daniel handed the photo to the waitress, unable to speak. She took the picture, reflexively, and stared at it. His eyes widened abruptly. His face lost all color. Her hands began to shake, so badly that she almost dropped the photo. I don't understand, she breathed, her voice breaking with panic. She brought a hand to her mouth, tears welling up in her eyes. It's me, there, in the photo. But I don't remember. I don't remember that. A wave of memories seemed to overwhelm the woman. At first, there were only flashes, blurred images that crossed his mind like shards of glass, painful and incomprehensible. She put a hand to her head, as if trying to hold back the unbearable pain, then her body began to shake uncontrollably. Oh my God, she breathed, her breath coming out in gasps. She staggered, unable to stand any longer, and sank into a nearby chair, her face pale and distraught. Her hands clutched the photo, trembling, while her gaze seemed to be lost in an inner abyss. Then, in a broken voice, between two sobs, she began to speak, as if the words were imposed on her, without her being able to hold them back. I remember, that road, it was night, it was raining. I was running. I think I was scared, so scared. She closed her eyes, and tears rolled down her cheeks. I was alone. I remember the sound of the branches, the wind, then a shock, a white light, after that, nothing, complete darkness. Her voice broke. She had to pause to catch her breath, as Daniel watched, paralyzed, his throat tight, his heart ready to explode. I was found unconscious, on the side of a road, in a forest. That's what I was told afterward. I had no papers, no phone, nothing on me. The doctors said I had suffered a violent blow to the head. They spoke of trauma, severe memory loss. I spent months in a psychiatric hospital in Vermont. I was unable to say who I was, where I came from. His voice was filled with distress, but also with the terror of those who have crossed an abyss from which they cannot escape. She continued, in a barely audible voice. They ended up calling me Grace. A nurse gave me that name because she said I had the grace to survive. I accepted it because I had nothing else left. I lived under that name, in this body I didn't recognize, building a new life for myself. But deep inside, there was still that emptiness, that dull ache. Like a missing piece. Daniel still couldn't speak. His hands were clenched on the table, his gaze fixed on her, stunned. Everything inside him refused to accept what he was hearing, but he knew it was true. Hesmelet, that it was true. It was her. Maggie. His wife. Alive. There, in front of him. During all this time, she had never died. She had disappeared, erased by a tragic accident, by a series of medical and administrative errors, and no one had ever recognized her. They had left her to die on paper, never knowing that she was still breathing. He finally stammered, his voice breaking with emotion. But, how is this possible? How could no one? She shook her head, unable to answer, overwhelmed by incomprehension itself. Daniel straightened up with sudden resolution, as if moved by a vital instinct. We must be clear about this. He took out his phone, his hands shaking, and immediately searched for a clinic specializing in DNA testing. He could no longer leave any room for doubt, even though his heart already knew. A few days later, in a cold, impersonal waiting room, they received the results. Daniel held the envelope in his hands, frozen, unable to open it. It was she, her voice trembling, who finally tore the paper. His eyes scanned the page. Her legs almost gave way beneath her. She slowly raised her head, her lips trembling. "It's me. I'm Maggie." Daniel felt a shock go through him, violent, unreal. He could no longer see anything around him, only that face, his wife's, and those words he never thought he would hear again. Doctors confirmed the unthinkable: severe dissociative amnesia, probably triggered by physical and psychological trauma, amplified by a series of tragic circumstances. She had never been dead. She had just been forgotten, lost, abandoned by a cruel fate. The death certificate was just a mistake, an administrative tragedy in a chain of events as absurd as they were devastating. In the room, Daniel broke down in tears, unable to hold back the overflow of emotions pent up for 8 long years. And facing him, Maggie, or rather Grace, this woman lost between 2 identities, stood there, stunned by the truth, frightened by the life that had just been brutally given back to her. 2 strangers bound by a love she no longer even remembered experiencing. The months that followed were long, intense, and sometimes painful. After the shock of the revelations, Maggie, or rather Grace, as it still presented itself reflexively, began a slow work of reconstruction. She accepted help from a team specializing in traumatic memory therapy. Each session was a plunge into a deep abyss, a mixture of pain and hope. At first, the memories came back in fragments, like uncontrollable flashes. A scent of laundry detergent in a white house with blue shutters. The laughter of a little boy running in a garden. A man's hands clasping hers in the moonlight. Sometimes these memories made her cry without her even being able to explain the cause. She oscillated between fear and wonder, between rejection and a burning desire to find it all again. Daniel, for his part, remained present, patient, even though his heart was alternately broken and full of hope. He understood that the woman he found was no longer the one he had mourned. She had known another life, even without memory. She had loved differently, suffered differently, grown up in the unknown, shaped by absence and the instinct for survival. But despite these years of separation, despite the amnesia, something remained between them. Invisible. A bond that resisted oblivion. Then came the time of the greatest test, Liam. Their meeting was both sweet and brutal. Liam, now a teenager, had grown up without her, carrying her absence like a silent scar. When he first saw her, he stood there, his fists clenched, unable to say a word. Maggie approached slowly, her throat tight, unable to contain the tears that rolled down her cheeks. She whispered, her voice trembling but filled with a deep maternal instinct. "My baby." And there, despite everything, despite the lost years, despite the pain, Liam threw himself into his arms. They cried together for a long time, without speaking. That day, Daniel understood that some bonds never break, even in the face of oblivion. The months passed, marked by medical appointments, awkward but sincere meals, afternoons spent leafing through photo albums to refresh memories. Little by little, Maggie found whole parts of her old life again. Her love for Daniel did not return suddenly, but it reappeared in the form of discrete evidence, a shared burst of laughter, a knowing look, the warmth of a hand in hers. They learned to love each other differently. Without clinging to the past, but building a new present, where patience and tenderness guided their steps. They decided to start again, but differently. Not like before. More like 2 strangers who chose to rediscover love, with the wisdom of those who know how life can tear everything away in an instant. A year later, in the same little restaurant where it all began, life had returned to normal. Maggie, now fully herself, continued to serve customers, her smile illuminating the room. She radiated a new light, serene and fulfilled, as if she now carried the strength of 2 lives combined. That day, a customer came in, accompanied by his son. They sat down by the window. When the waitress passed by them, the man looked at her for a long time, intrigued, struck by something indescribable. He leaned towards his son and whispered thoughtfully, "She reminds me of your mother." The boy, a bright-faced teenager, smiled slightly and replied, in a soft voice, with almost adult wisdom, "Yes, it's because it's her." In a corner of the room, sitting calmly, Daniel observed the scene, a discreet smile on the corner of his lips, his gaze peaceful. He understood, at that precise moment, that some miracles are not made of magic or chance. Some miracles have the face of the past and offer a second life.